Okay, hello to everyone. This is our first English interview with someone from Gaza. We have a distinguished guest, Yousef Aljamal. He's a close friend of mine, and let me introduce Yousef to you. Yousef Aljamal is the Gazan coordinator at the Palestine Activism Program at the American Friends Service Committee. Yusuf is a refugee from El Nusayrat refugee camp in Gaza Strip. He has recently received his PhD at the Middle East Institute at Sakarya University in Turkey. So I know Yusuf from the same institute because I also received the same PhD from the same university and same institute. So welcome, Yusuf. Thank you for accepting our invitation today.
Thank you for having me, Mehmet. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. We are going to talk about the latest situation in Gaza, and I'm going to ask you some questions about Gaza and also about Rifat El Arir because he was a close friend of you. So let me start with asking the question is that what role will international and regional responses play in Gaza future? And also, I would like to ask it has been argued that there are lots of comments from Gaza and also outside of Gaza. There are lots of people criticizing 7 October and some of them blaming Hamas for not achieving the truth, the right decision. So the actions or 7 October was a mistake because it escalated a genocide that had been going on for more than a year. So how Gazan people see the 7 October and the future of the Palestine?
Okay, so 70% of the people of Gaza, we have about 2.3 million people in Gaza, are refugees, including my family. There are 8 refugee camps. These Palestinians became refugees in 1948. And speaking of the American Friends Service Committee, it was the Quakers actually who started refugee camps before the UN agency UNRWA was established in 1949, and it took over these refugee camps. So the Quakers have a long history in Gaza and Palestine. I think that this history is important to remember today. The October 7 attacks did not happen in vacuum. We have the whole history of colonization and siege and oppression in Gaza.
Mhm.
Gaza has been subjected to military rule for 6 months in 1956 when Israel captured the Gaza Strip during the Suez Canal crisis. And it has been under Egyptian rule until 1967. So from 1948 until 1967 was under Egyptian rule, and Israel was established. And these refugees were kicked out of their towns and villages, although there is a UN resolution that calls for their return. Some of these refugees attempted to go back. They were called infiltrators by Israel. Many of them were massacred, killed. Israeli forces would carry out attacks against refugee camps, such as in Khan Yunis and Rafah, killing hundreds of Palestinians. And this was in the 50s. And then when Israel captured the Gaza Strip, more people became refugees. So they were refugees or they were made refugees twice in their lives, some of them 3 times. So Gaza has never lived a normal life since 1948 because of the creation of Israel. There were plans also to kick young Palestinians out of Gaza. It was introduced by then Israel's Defense Minister Moshe Dayan by sending them to Latin America on a one-way ticket. And this plan was exposed. A few Palestinians were sent and then it was exposed, so it did not succeed. What I'm trying to say is that in Israel's mentality and strategic thinking, Gaza has always been a problem. And they wanted to get rid of Palestinians involved in UNRWA to buy land for Palestinian refugees in northern Sinai in 1953. And there were huge protests in Gaza against this plan. So the population of Gaza has been increasing. It has tripled in 1948 because of the influx of Palestinian refugees. But going up from 80,000 to about 360,000 in 1948. We were talking about few months. There was a huge influx of refugees, and over the years since 1948 up until now, the population of Gaza has increased up to 2.3 million Palestinians, and that's why Israel have always seen in them a threat. Many of these refugees live across the border from what used to be their towns and villages, and that's why these plans have always existed to push Palestinians out of Gaza, whether October 7 happened or not. Israel has always viewed Gaza as a threat. As I said, I remember there was a radio program in Israel asking people what to do with Gaza. This was 10, 15 years ago. And one of the people called in and said, we should turn Gaza into a parking lot, the biggest parking lot in the world. And this is how they see Gaza. If you look at the destruction today, it's not about security. It's not about October 7. The destruction of Gaza is about getting rid of the question of Palestinian refugees. And hence, we have the attack on UNRWA. So UNRWA is the UN agency that represents Palestinian refugees. It's the only UN agency created for a specific people, the Palestinian people, because the influx of Palestinian refugees, as I said, was very big, and it needed a separate UN agency to handle it in 1949. So that's why Israel will continue to attack UNRWA, will continue to wage propaganda wars against refugees. But the final goal of
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. There was a cut in internet, but no problem. I think you are basically saying that the responsible for 7 October or before the occupation or the embargo on Gaza is of course Israel, because Israel has been there is a trend in Israel strategic mentality that Gaza is a kind of problem, not is a kind of problem, is a source of problem because of the mentality of resistance arise from Gaza, and the people and the population is growing up. So the Gazan people are subjected, have been subjected a kind of occupation or whatever you call. They have never experienced a kind of normal life. How do you see the possible scenarios following the 7 October? The potential scenarios could emerge in Gaza. Maybe uh, I think Israel, Netanyahu specifically, he has determined to reoccupy Gaza. Maybe he's thinking also to give the administration to PLO, headed by Mohammed Dahlan. It has been articulated by lots of academicians or analysts. The first steps of the scenario is reoccupation of Gaza. The second one is continuation of the war till 2026. Another one is, calling a ceasefire or accepting the mediation attempts by Qatar or Turkey. But it's obvious that Netanyahu has no intention to end the war. How do you see the potential scenarios after 7 October for Gaza?
So there are different scenarios, but regardless of the scenario, I'll talk about these scenarios shortly. But regardless of any scenario, what is a fact in Gaza today is that we have a catastrophe. It will take years to rebuild Gaza. We have a
Is 4
total,
or 5 years, right?
at least,
Yes.
we have a total destruction of infrastructure, of the education sector, the health sector. We have a huge brain drain. A lot of people are trying to leave Gaza or left Gaza, especially academics and experts. There is no life in Gaza now, and it will be very difficult for Palestinians to go back to normal. And this is what Israeli leaders said soon after October 7, that they're going to send Gaza 50 years back, and they did. Now, with Gaza, we have radicals in the Israeli government, such as Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they're advocating for settlements in Gaza and building new settlements. They even published maps and registered some 700 families, took them in trips and boats in the Mediterranean, showing them Gaza. But again, we have to also look at the point of view of the Israeli army. The Israeli army is losing manpower every day, including in Gaza after a year. They're also engaged in war with Lebanon. And I don't think that the Israeli army is of this point of view that resettlements should happen in Gaza. So they're trying to find a way out of this. There should be a ceasefire. This is like the immediate ask that we have. Unlimited humanitarian access, because we have starvation everywhere, including in the south as well as in the north. It's much worse in the north. But then who's going to rule Gaza? This is the big question. Now, there are debates among Palestinians and political factions in Gaza, Hamas and Fatah, saying that we should, and these ideas are supported by Egypt, that an administrative committee should be established that is not political, that should run the affairs of Gaza, the reconstruction process. But what is sure is that Palestinians in Gaza will not accept Israel's occupation again. Maybe the PLO will play a greater role, but at the end of the day, Israel and the West are also aware that Hamas is still there, although it has been greatly weakened. But they have to deal with facts on the ground at the end of the day. For instance, now there is increasing number of attacks on aid trucks because of the lack of a police force. So you cannot just leave Gaza like that without a government, without a police force. Otherwise, this is a recipe for chaos, and this is what Netanyahu wants in Gaza. There are also calls to include international forces, Arab forces. So far, Palestinians have refused these calls. They said the day after in Gaza should be purely Palestinian. And I don't think that Palestinians will welcome another force. They're already tired of Israel's ongoing occupation. Although there were no physical forces on the ground in Gaza, Israeli forces, but Israel also and always controlled Gaza by land, sea, and air. So we have always been living under siege, and we do not want another form of control or occupation. So the day after in Gaza should be purely Palestinian.
Okay. And last question is about your personal experience. You were a friend of Rifat El Harir. Could it be possible that you introduce Rifat El Harir to us and analyze his impact on Palestinian resistance? How do you describe his contribution as a prominent Gazan writer, poet, or professor at university? What were some of his most remarkable work or habits during your friendship? You were with him, as I think, in US or also in Malaysia. Maybe you know him from Gaza, I don't know. Tell me about your personal experience regarding Rifat.
I got to know Rifat in 2007. I was his student. I went to the English language department, and he just returned back from UCL, University College London, after he obtained his MA in comparative literature. And then we became close friends. As you said, we traveled to Malaysia and the US together, promoting Gaza Rise Back, a book he edited. I contributed a short story, and there's a memorial edition now coming out on December 3rd to honor Rifat. It's a memorial edition of Gaza Rise Back.
Turkish, right? The book also is translated into Turkish, Gaza Rise Back.
Yeah, so Gaza Rise Back is translated into Turkish as well as Light in Gaza. Rifat contributed a chapter to Light in Gaza, and there is also a Turkish translation of this book titled Gazze'deki Işık, Ateşten Doğan Yazıları ya da Yazılar. And so Rifat edited two books, Gaza Rise Back and this is his like first book, and this is his first baby in literature and writing. He was very proud of this book. And in fact, I was told recently that a copy of Gaza Writes Back was with him when he was assassinated. So this book was very special, and that's why we worked with other writers and the publishing house, Just Word Books, to produce a memorial edition to honor him. There's also Gaza and Silence. He co-edited Gaza and Silence with Layla Al-Haddad. It's a collection of essays and articles from Gaza about Gaza that came out in 2015. And finally, and these books, especially Gaza Writes Back, were translated into many languages, not just Turkish. I know Italian, Spanish, Malay, and other languages, and Arabic most recently. I know there is also a Greek and Slovenian translation in work. And so this year I decided to compile together all or most of Rif'at's writings, poetry and prose,
non-published,
opinion articles. Many of them are published, but some of them are unpublished, and put them in one book between two covers. And the book is titled If I Must Die, after the famous poem of Rif'at, If I Must Die, You Must Live to Tell My Story, which he wrote for his daughter, Shayma, who was killed in April this year, along with her son, newly born son, and husband. So, I benefited a lot from Rif'at. He taught me, I helped him organize many courses. We traveled together, we lived together. He means a lot to me, and this is the least we could do to honor his legacy. Yes. You see that his writings are all over the world now, and people are honoring him. And I encourage people to get these two books, to order them. They're available online on the websites of Just Word Books and Or Books, and to read more about Rif'at and to honor him. And a lot of people do not know that. So there is, as I said, Turkish translation of Gaza Writes Back, Gaza Jawab Yazıyor, and Light in Gaza, to which Rif'at contributed a chapter about his life, and he opened up about his childhood and growing up under occupation for the first time. Usually Rif'at doesn't talk about his own struggle. He invested in people. He taught young people courses on creative writing so that they write their own stories. So he trained an army of young writers. This is his legacy from Gaza, who are still writing today. But again, in this chapter, he opened up and he talked about his own childhood under occupation and losing his uncle, and how his parents survived this many times because of Israel's fire and attacks. Rif'at himself was shot when he was a teenager. He was throwing stones at Israeli soldiers. And if you look at the poem, even like the kite, that's Rif'at himself flying a kite when he was a child. This is something he did
also
in
the
Shujaiya.
poet. Yes, he also say the same thing in the poet. The flying kite.
Yes, absolutely. That's why he talks about it. So the child in the poem is Rif'at, and that was his will to his daughter, Shayma. But Shayma did not live long enough to tell his story. But also Rif'at did not live long enough to see his first grandchild. He became a grandchild at the age of 44 because Israel cut his life short. Why? Because he promoted a resistance narrative that challenged Israel's Hasbara and propaganda. And Rif'at was very smart at it. He understood Israel's ABCs of Hasbara, and he was very smart at debunking these claims and lies about the Palestinian people. And that's why Israel made him a target. He was a digital warrior who was equally important on the ground, he was the official spokesperson of Gaza in the English-speaking world. And in one of his last interviews with the Electronic Intifada, he said, if I have, like, the last thing I would do is to throw an expo marker at Israeli soldiers. And this is, an act of defiance. He was very defiant. That's why he stayed in Gaza City. He chose not to go to the south. And he paid a heavy price. That was his life. He sacrificed his life to tell Gaza's story. And that's why we should honor him and
He had the
continue to
choice.
tell
He had
his
the
story.
choice to live in other countries, in the UK, in the US, but he chose to stay in Gaza. That's also showing his braveness, his smartness. He was, as I told,
Absolutely.
He was a spokesperson for Gazan resistance ideology, not a soldier, but he was a digital warrior. So let's honor him. That's why I bring his name to this discussion, because he is not well known in Turkey. He is well known in Turkey, but for those who care about Palestinian resistance ideology, I know him because of you. I follow you and I follow his studies and writings on Twitter and other social media. But unfortunately, he has to be known in Turkey because Turkey has been siding with Palestine and Gazan people. So thank you, Yusuf, for for being with us. There are lots of things to discuss. We have tons of thousands of topics to explore or also discuss. So next time, inshallah, we will make it more longer. And thank you for
Absolutely.
us again.
Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.